Hello guys, today I'll start a series of tutorials to explain how to make a race game in Battlefield 2024. You don't have to be a rules editor expert to understand how this works because I'll be providing all the needed details to understand, and the method I'm using can be used to create other type of games. In tutorial 1, I'll cover how you create a racetrack because Battlefield 2024 is not a race game and you have nothing such a racing track. So you need to define it in terms of checkpoints. I'll explain later in details what does it mean, and you need also to define directions to give for the driver to know how to navigate through the track. And in step 2, I'll show you how you can validate checkpoints. What I mean by validating a checkpoint is to update the game state when a player runs through a checkpoint and how you give him directions to head to the next one. The requirements for this game are two. First one, the code should allow to define any track on any map without rewriting the game logic. This allows you to take the code we are going to make here in this tutorial and create any track on any game. So you can create and customize your own racing games. Requirement 2 should allow you also to take the same framework we are going to create in this tutorial and extend it to make a multiplayer game. So we need to make attention to very small details when coding to allow this. In the coming tutorials of this series, I'll go through how to manage the starting line, the race starting, and how you can manage the race ending. I'll start by providing an overview of what we will be doing. For a race game, we need to define a track, and Battlefield 2024 is not a race game, and there is no such as track definition. We need to define a track using checkpoints, and checkpoints are locations on the map. Meaning you need to go on the map and find a way to grab some valid locations to use them as checkpoints. I will not cover this because there is many tutorials on the net explaining how to do it. Now a track is divided in different parts. There is a starting line, there is different checkpoints, and a finish line. The finish line itself is a checkpoint. When a driver goes through a checkpoint, we need to provide him directions to get to the next checkpoint. And when the driver arrives to the finish line, the race ends. Now let's start with step 1, which is defining checkpoints and direction. That is the same thing as saying we are going to define a track. To hold checkpoints and direction, I'm going to create in the rules editor two arrays, array 1 and array 2. The array to hold checkpoints will be called track checkpoints, and the one for directions will be called directions. And both are global variables. And the basic idea behind this is I can extend the array to add new checkpoints or different checkpoints to create a new track. Each checkpoint has an associated direction in the other array, like checkpoint 0 at index 0 in the track checkpoints array has a direction associated with it, which is in the directions array, also at position 0, and so on. Each checkpoint, like checkpoint 1, has also an associated direction in the other array. Now that the track data model is defined, we can now start coding the validation checkpoints process. In the checkpoint validation process, I need to do two things. First one is to define an area around the checkpoint. When the driver enters it, the checkpoint is validated. This will make checkpoint validation easier. And the second thing I'm going to do is to prevent a driver to go to any checkpoint in any order. The driver should go from, let's say, checkpoint 0 to checkpoint 1 to checkpoint 2 until the finish line in order. Let's zoom on a checkpoint. I will call it rather checkpoint area. We already have the checkpoint center, and whenever the driver crosses this checkpoint, let's say with a given distance from the center, the checkpoint will be validated. That means there is a sort of circle area about around the checkpoint center, and this checkpoint area has a radius, which I will call the area radius. And in the rules editor, I'll define it as a global variable. Now that we know how to validate a checkpoint, let's see how we can validate the checkpoints in order. We already have a track checkpoints array that contains all our checkpoints, and these checkpoints are indexed from 0 to, well, whatever number of checkpoints we have. I'll create a player variable called next checkpoint, and this variable will point to the current checkpoint in the track checkpoints array. The next checkpoint is a value that will contain the index of the current checkpoint. The next checkpoint, when I initialize it, will be 0. That means the first element in the array will be the active one or the next checkpoint to be validated. And when a checkpoint is validated, all I need to do is to increase the next checkpoint pointer value by 1, and this way it will point to the next checkpoint in the array. Then I can retrieve this position, this checkpoint location, and validate this checkpoint as we defined it earlier. In terms of code, it would look like this. I need to define an event that is triggered when the distance between the player position and the checkpoint that has the index next checkpoint. If the distance between these two vectors is smaller than the area radius, meaning the player is inside the checkpoint area, and in that case what I'll do is increase the next checkpoint variable by 1, so it points to the next checkpoint, and I can display also the checkpoint direction that has the same index as the next checkpoint, but in the directions array. Now in the rules editor, how this will looks like. I'll go first to variables to show you what are the defined variables here. We have directions, which is a directions array, track checkpoints array, and checkpoint radius. These are the global variables. In player variables, we have the next checkpoint that will be used as a pointer to point to the next checkpoint to be validated. I created also an initTrack subroutine, and in this one I'll update or I'll insert values into the directions array and the track checkpoints array. First of all, I also define here the checkpoint radius. I put it to 5 meters. Maybe it's too small. I'll put it to 8 here. And I create first 2 empty arrays, an empty array for directions, an empty array for track checkpoints, and after that I start inserting values in these arrays. This is how adding a value to the direction array will look like. First you need to append to the array directions a value, and then you use the set variable to overwrite the directions array with the new one, which is appended with the new value, and you repeat this for as many values you have. In this track we are defining here, we have 3 checkpoints, and the directions are turn right, turn left, and finish. After that, I update the track checkpoints. I collected earlier some values from the map, so I create a vector for each of the checkpoints, and in the same way I added values to the directions array, I'll add these vectors to the track checkpoints array. And since everything is in the init-track subroutine, I'll call this subroutine in the on game mode started. This is where the track is initialized. Now the validate checkpoint subroutine will display a message to show the direction. So where this message is retrieved from, it's retrieved from the directions array, and using the next checkpoint as it's a pointer, and it points to the current direction I need to provide. And after that, I update the next checkpoint variable by adding 1 to it. So I'm using the add function, which will add 1 to the next checkpoint variable. It's a player variable, as you see here, and it regards the current event player. And after adding this value to the next checkpoint, I overwrite the old next checkpoint value with this new one. And that's it. I hope this tutorial was useful for you. And if you have questions, you can leave them in the comment section, and I'll make my best to answer them.